Good morning, everyone. Casey here from Territory 3, Kiwi Landing Pad Reimagined. And today I'm joined with our guest, Symon from Parallo. Symon, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, pretty happy to be here.
So today's going to be a very cool session. I've been personally looking forward to this one. We're diving through all things infrastructure and things you should know from cloud infrastructure as a founder. Personally, Symon, I feel it's like a bit of a challenging subject to know from the outside of really where to put the emphasis and how to best set yourself up for success. So I'm really looking forward to just kind of diving through that. So folks, we've got a number of questions on exactly how we're going to do that. For some context, Parallo and led by Symon, they work with a number of companies going through exactly this, of making sure that they get their house in order and set themselves up for success. And from those learnings, we're really going to kind of extract actionable things that you can do and consider looking into the future. So as folks start tuning in, we see a number of people coming through now. Let us know where you're tuning in from. It'd be great to see where you're based. And of course, as always, if you've got any questions, do put them in the chat, and Symon and myself are more than happy to circle around and hit them as we go. But Symon, you've got a long-standing background in the IT side of things. You're very hands-on the tools, and then you made the jump onto the other side of the fence to bring those two worlds together, which is kind of what led to the creation of Parallo. Do you want to start by maybe talking a bit about your founder story and how it all came about?
Yeah, sure. So we actually started Parallo 10 years ago next week, which I'd sort of overlooked until I recognised that recently. Man, that time's flown by.
Congrats.
Yeah, thanks. But it was actually three friends. Me, Nicole, and Shaun, Nicole Schaefer and Shaun Weber. We all worked together at an IT company in the late 90s. Yes, we're all old, and we're all engineers doing infrastructure stuff, networks, security, servers, all that sort of stuff. And that was late 90s. Nicole had already traveled the world and started to have a family. Shaun and I decided to go to England and work over there independently, but we ended up working there again, came back 3 years later independently, but ended up working again at another company. And so we worked there for about 8 years doing some sort of industry first cloud services stuff around business continuity, and then decided to start our own business. And so we did that in 2011 as a subsidiary of another company managing VMware infrastructure, which back then was quite revolutionary, sort of like cloud is today. And we did that for about 3 years, and then I met the CEO of a company called Merlot Aero, who still a customer of ours, and that CEO, Mark, was in a point in his business evolution that we now come to recognize as being really normal, actually, for a SaaS company, where they get to about 3 years old. In fact, probably the demographic you shared of the people who are probably on this call, you get to about three years old or so, you've finally got product market fit. You've got a lot of demand from customers and so on to build features. You may be getting some paid feature requests, but because you're actually not that far away from being three friends in a garage, making it work, that you start to go through those sort of inflection points around maturity cycles, around operational stuff and other things. And so a common scenario, and this is the scenario that Mark was in, was he was getting, cost blowouts. He was getting customers ringing him up going, "Why is your app so slow?" He'd get the occasional call, "Where is your app gone? It's not online anymore." And these are all really normal outcomes for a SaaS business as they go through that growth cycle, and that those were symptoms of the dev team being tasked with managing the platform, because again, going back to when it's three friends in a room somewhere, that's what you do. But they were now so big and so much demand on product that the dev team just weren't proactively managing platform or cost. They were building features, and so Mark was in that situation. And he said to me, "Can you help? I get that you guys are good at IT managed services," which we were for VMware basically back then. And I said to him, "Well, yes, we're very good at that sort of complex managed service stuff around having the right people, systems, disciplines, processes, and so on. don't really know the Azure technology side of it, but if you pay me to solve your problem, I'll do it for you, which is a bit cheeky, and sort of how the relationship is carried on for the next 7 years. But we came up with a commercial construct that reflected that, and I started still being on the tools actually, solving his problem. And it was me and another guy, and really quickly, like within a couple of months, we'd sort of pull the fires out, but it was just so difficult to do that as a person, as a human, because cloud is so broad and deep, and there's so many moving parts, and it's so dynamic. So we realized that we really had to be automating the optimization of security, performance, availability, and cost, the 4 pillars that we think you really need to care about. So we did that with Mark, and that was a fabulous journey. Mark recently actually was acquired. His business was acquired by CAE, I think for about 45 million or something. It was quite a good outcome. But he's a really highly motivated, really intelligent entrepreneur, and he sprints. He's a sprinter. He's going that way at 1 million miles an hour. And so as a first customer, for our business, going from being a servers and storage, screwdriver in your laptop bag type company, to being a meaningful service provider to a software company, had to learn what that meant. And so it was fabulous to have Mark sprinting at 1 million miles an hour, going, "Keep up, Symon, don't let that happen again. This is important to me, watch out for that." And so we got to learn really quickly what was important. And with our sort of highly proactive DNA, I guess, around making stuff always work, we just applied that to what we were doing. And so it was about 2 years, in fact, almost 2.5 years, working only with Merlot, with one SaaS company, really just figuring out what this MVP was. And I heard someone say recently, if you're not embarrassed by your MVP, then you've done it too late. And so, we absolutely spent too much time just MVPing with Mark's business. But I got to a point where I thought, okay, I think I've figured something out that looks really meaningful. It is really meaningful to this one company. Maybe it's not maybe I haven't just fluked on one company with a unique problem. Maybe I've identified an industry problem. And so I packed my bags and went off to SaaStr in San Francisco, which probably everyone here knows about that. And I spoke to, 30 or 40, maybe more, founders, VP engineering, all the fabulous people that go to that conference. In fact, that is the best conference I've ever been to. And if any of you haven't gone, I know they're doing it in person in September, which is probably too soon, but absolutely put it on your list. It is so worth it, because it's a non-technical conference. Everyone there is there to grow their SaaS company. And so you're talking to people who are absolutely aligned with what you're trying to do. So anyway, I went there, spoke to all these founders and so on, and just said, hey, if there was an affordable, trustworthy partner that could take the technical noise away from from the cloud platform aspect of running a SaaS company, would you want to talk to them? And they all said yes. And I thought, wow, well, that's amazing. Okay, well then I think I've found, I've validated that there's a problem we're solving. And so came back, full of optimism after that conference, and started trying to sell it to someone else. And that took ages. So probably about 6 months, because I couldn't really figure out how to articulate the problem well enough. And I could tell them what we did, because I'm an engineer, not a sales guy. But so it took quite a while. Anyway, we sort of got the confidence of Microsoft along that journey, and they were trying to help a bunch of software companies become sort of SaaS companies, if you like, and move on to the Microsoft public cloud. So they asked us to help do that. And so I said yes, and I got to pitch, 30 or 40 times in a quarter, which sort of, helped me to figure it out. And so I did that, and that's sort of what made it all take off. And so as we've gone along that journey, and we now have 45 SaaS companies that we actively manage, and we're adding more every month. And we're starting to really learn some common issues with them. But the thing that I guess resonates, and is the fundamental, I guess, reason why we're getting a lot of engagement from SaaS companies, is there's really three, if you can be pretty highly summarized about it, there's really three market segments of SaaS businesses, I think. There's the old client server, software company identifies as an independent software vendor, is run by someone probably a bit older than me, and is not up for the risk of replatforming, becoming SaaS and so on, is just going to ride it out to retirement sort of thing. So there's those companies. Then there's ones that are similar to that, but do want to remain current, do recognize that if they don't move to the SaaS model, don't get on a public cloud, they're going to get left behind, and then so wanting to innovate and get into a cloud, but they have revenue, they're probably profitable, that they're a well-established business. And then there's the startup community, which is fundamentally probably the people on this call who are pretty much probably not making profit yet, might not even be an objective at the moment, really focusing on growth. And of course I'm preaching to the converted, but certainly the message that I get back is that that startup sector sort of survived from funding round to funding round, and it's absolutely essential, as we all know, to demonstrate consistent growth, to get to the next round and to get a good valuation and to get good terms and so on, to get that next round and continue your journey. And so if the founders are doing anything other than sort of focusing on growth and product, then that's sort of impacting the ability to get good terms or get a good round the next time. And so it's almost an existential problem. If you're getting distracted away from growth and product, then you're basically putting the business at risk. And if you think about the way that the market expects SaaS apps to operate, if we think about Spotify and Netflix as two ubiquitous examples, it must always be up and it must always be responsive, and that's just what we expect. And now the world expects that of any SaaS app, and obviously there are complexities behind the scenes to make that work, but that is absolute table stakes. That's where you start from, not where you end. So it's essential that those things are done well, right?
Absolutely hit the nail on the head. Like it's absolutely that juggle, right? Like you're trying to make, as a founder, as much progress as you can on the growth and building out your product and all that sort of great stuff. And that's like it's a never-ending streamline of work. And as you're going through and working with customers, and you're discovering new things and prioritizing, you just can't get through it all quick enough. So you're trying to reprioritize. But then adjacent to that is exactly this problem, which is like, shit, why is this running slow? And they feel like just bugs on the sideline and not something you want to be putting your focus on, at least until they rear their ugly head, sort of thing, right? But then all of a sudden something crops up here and it goes slow, or there's like a cost blowout. The other week I was running some tests with the startup I'm working with. We created a bloody infinite loop, and we blew through a whole bunch of bloody credits, and like that whole server crashed in the middle of a session. It was but exactly this point, which is like, it's something is important, but it's you're dealing with it as you feel you need to because you're so stretched from a resource perspective. But then the other point they said so true as well, which is like the expectations of consumers is so high now that as soon as you come to market, it's kind of almost juxtaposition. I've heard that what you said before is, I think it was Michael Siebel I heard it from, which was like, if you're launching your product and you're not embarrassed about it, then you've launched it too late, which is so true. But you've got to kind of like straddle this kind of oxymoron with the fact that expectations of how fast it works. There's certain trade-offs that, especially if you're like a B2C sort of play, they just have super high expectations. So it's a real juggle. Yeah,
indeed it is. Where was I? So
on the speed responsive piece, so the Netflix, the Spotify.
Thank you. I lost my train of thought there for a sec. So so the thing, that always working and always responsive is the table stakes where you start. So obviously the thing that differentiates your business from someone else's is the product, and how good is it and how differentiated is it. So that absolutely must be focused on. And so that's, I think when I really understood that, it sort of all made sense about why why I guess we are getting the growth that we are. So there's businesses like ours which deals with the technical noise aspects of running an app on a public cloud. There's businesses like Matt Doles from Oxygen Advisors, who probably a few people on the call would be customers of his, who's doing that sort of virtual CFO side of it as well. So all these parts, these aspects of running the business that you don't differentiate you. It doesn't. Being great at managing a cloud platform doesn't make your app any better. So why focus on it? And that's sort of that was what crystallized with us. And so of course, as we went through that journey of 7 years, being the screwdrivers and storage and servers people, we started with the real fundamentals of, well, you got to make sure that the lights are blinking and the RAM and the CPU's okay and so on. But that's super low level stuff that's pretty much automated away these days. And so realized that and it was through experience actually that we realized we really had to get roadblocks out of the way of developers. And this is a general theme, not just something we need to do. And that was really illustrated by two different types of customers. We had one customer who would do a quarterly release, and it was a mission critical enterprise SaaS app. And in that quarterly release would be a ton of new features and bug fixes and so on. And they weren't always 100% in terms of QA and so on. And so they had some customers that were really risk averse. And so those customers would test every feature pretty much on every release, and it would take them a couple of months. And then by the time they got their ducks lined up, they'd be a couple of weeks away from the next release, and their testing would have identified some bugs which were already fixed in the next release coming in 2 weeks' time. But because it takes long to test it, they'd been in a never-ending loop if they just kept skipping from one to another. So they'd have to put it in production, and so on and so on. So I guess you can picture how inefficient and wasteful that is compared to other customers of ours who deploy multiple times a day, have tiny iterative feature changes and so on. So there is no such thing as UAT from a customer perspective. There's no point because there's only tiny changes being made. And so, think of the customer value of that sort of continuous deployment model in terms of, I don't have to test anymore, I can just get on with running my business. But also the differentiation between those two, if they're competitors, then obviously the features are about the same. Obviously the end user is going to choose the one that doesn't have downtime for an upgrade and all that sort of stuff, right? I think customers' appetite to put up with that sort of stuff is just eroding. So we learned that was really important to be able to automate all that stuff, and then even go up a layer further, which we your customer's experience obviously is just number one priority. If they enjoy using your app and it's got the right features that they need, then they'll stay with you. And we sort of recognized that was the case. We had our ultimate customer actually wasn't our direct customer, it was our customer's customer, because if we're to the degree that we comprehend what's going on in the background, if we can identify that there's a poor customer experience opportunity with customer, let's say it's an e-commerce site, they choose some stuff to buy, they click check out, and the little round thing spins for 10 seconds. Well, not many people put up with that for long. So how can we identify, or even how can our customers identify what's going on in that 10 seconds, leveraging things like application performance management to identify where in the stack is that happening, and how do we actually positively impact it. So pulling all that together really to provide a great customer experience, which I think regardless of who does it, those are the tools that you really need in your kit bag to provide a great outcome to a customer.
So some of those, I'm really keen, if we can, to dive into some of those tactical things. So like we talked about potentially blowout of costs is obviously something that can happen. The way things are set up is inefficient, or if I understand it correctly, Symon, you could be drawing on resources that you're not even using, but then you're still paying for them. So I think you might have mentioned it earlier actually. A lot of early stage SaaS businesses, regardless of what platform you're on, you've probably got some credits from the cloud provider, and it's pretty easy to get a bit blasé about how you consume them, because in some cases you might have got quite a lot, but in many cases as you come out of credits and into actually paying the bill, that first bill is always a metaphorical punch in the face. So it's really important while you're still running on credits to get your cost management tidied up, and make sure you're disciplined about what you're doing. And I think you mentioned, Casey, a scenario which we've seen many times where
someone might introduce a bug, like it looks like you guys might have, and then and then if you're using some of the logging, like log analytics in the Microsoft world, or some if you're doing you're logging, and then you generate a gazillion gigs of logs because you've introduced this error, and you're paying for storage and you're paying for log ingestion, that's a really common cost spike. And so it's really important to be actively monitoring that, and have someone's day job being to monitor it or put automations in place. So as an example, we've written a couple of automated processes that treat this. So every day we retrieve the usage of every customer's cloud infrastructure, and we compare the cost to 3 days before and 7 days before. And if it's jumped, then we send a message via Slack. It's automated, actually just pops a graph into Slack or Teams, whatever, and says, hey, your cost changed yesterday. It went from whatever to whatever. It's a bar graph, actually, and you can grab the details and see what, was it database, network, storage, some fundamentals, what changed. Oh, that went up $50 a day. Oh, no, we're expecting that, we deployed a new instance or we did whatever. But yeah, that's really important to be detecting that, but also to be detecting waste and making sure that that you have visibility over what has been deployed and is not being used. And it's not, again, we've written an automated process to do that, which just queries, everything that's deployed and queries its usage amount, whether it's like, databases or last access date or time, or compute, what percent load's hitting it. If there's very little load or access, well, a long time ago something was accessed, then call it out and take proactive measures against it. But absolutely, someone has to focus on it. Otherwise, everybody who doesn't proactively manage costs gets bill shock. It's like death and taxes.
Guaranteed, right? So on that range thing, so if I understand that correctly, so do you kind of like identify what's like a local minimum and a local maximum of what you'd expect your cost to be for a particular element of the product and the usage? And if it spikes outside of what would be a normal expected range, that triggers an automated message for someone to look into it. So that way you don't actually have to have all eyes on you. Like you're actually having tech that helps call it out when it happens.
Yeah, we're looking at the average. So what was the spend yesterday, and what is the average, previously, and how much away from the average are you? Which we can set. Normally it's 10%. If there's a variance of 10%, then we call it out, up or down. But also, there are built-in tools into cloud platforms that have budget features. But I haven't looked at those for a while, but from memory, those were sort of, okay, you've got a budget of 10 grand this month, warn me when you get to 75% of it. And that's sort of good. But if you get to it on day 2 and you've got 28 days left, then you've got a problem. Yeah. So cost is a big one, especially for early stage companies where cash is tight and you just cannot afford to blow out. So it's really important to be proactive about cost management, not reactive.
We've got a question, Simon, from Shane Gibson, who's based here around Wellington. Kia ora, Shane. The question is, are you doing anything in the cooperative space? By this, I mean combining the bills from multiple startups and using them to get larger discounts from the cloud provider.
That's a good point. I know that in the early days, one of the distributors was doing that with AWS. They were buying the spot pricing, or the reserved instance pricing, and then selling it as a non-committed resource to others. We haven't done that. That's a sort of gets us to start becoming a finance company rather than a technology company. But yeah, it's a good point, and we've been thinking about that it's probably worth considering. Certainly in the Microsoft sphere, there are now I know there's probably 20 different things that you can make a reserved instance, and there's actually I know due to COVID, they made no penalty on cancelling reserved instances. Or if there was, it was tiny. So it was sort of a no-brainer to just look across your estate and go, yep, okay, we should reserve, and we should commit to say 12 months reserved instance on this, and this, and gut your cost, by a lot. So absolutely, yeah. So we didn't really get to that side of cost management. There's always savings. in almost any instance, when we first meet a new customer, I know 20% at least, sometimes 40% cost saving, and there's some inventive things you can do, like in the Microsoft side of it, you can get a reserved instance, but you can also actually buy a license and then use that to get a discount against a reserved instance even further, a hybrid use benefit, I think it's called. So there is some smoke and mirrors you can play to get the cost down, but absolutely, that is that aspect of it is worth digging into.
Cool. And folks, do put your questions through, and we'll be happy to circle to them. In the first instance, Symon, I guess kind of building on the same thing, are there some examples you could talk to from startups, in particular if possible, but in general businesses that you've worked with, and some tangible sort of outcomes that you've achieved? And I know that there'd be an element of confidentiality of where you can't go, but just to help kind of put it in the founders' minds that are listening on how significant this can be, especially as you say, like once you run out of credits and the costs can get horrific. I've got a couple of examples of tech debt actually and the impacts of it. Tech debt.
So that was, I think, when you first build, you're sort of building MVP, you might not be. In fact, comes back to something I talked about on another webinar this week, actually with Mark, the founder of Merlot. And one of the questions was, what is one of the fundamental things you should consider as you're building your business? And he put forward, don't be blinkered by how big you think the opportunity could be. Take the blinkers off and think how big this could be. If I had unlimited resources, how big could this be? And dial it back a little bit from that. But when you're building, so have that in mind. If you really think you've got a global, you've found a burning hair problem for a global market, and if you had the resources, you could get it out there. Well, then consider that as you're building, because it's a real handbrake if you just hang it together with number 8 wire and so on to get it into market quickly, and then you grow quickly and you find, oh shit, I've got this this platform which is going to wobble. So a couple of examples there. One customer was turning away business. In fact, stopped looking for it because their platform couldn't handle anymore. I mean, how bad is that? That is the worst scenario to be in. Well, it's not the worst, but it's a pretty bad one. Because they hadn't built for scale, and so they were furiously trying to refactor and change. Another customer who was probably one of New Zealand's biggest SaaS platforms, were pretty modern. They were on platform as a service, components of public clouds, but they had just experienced so much growth that their architecture just couldn't handle it anymore, and they had to refactor for scale. So those are two real world examples. There's another big customer of ours also recently acquired, that they know that they've got about a 8-month window before they will have to stop taking new customers because of tech debt. They've allowed tech debt to build up, and it actually became such a major issue that there was a massive program of work to re-architect elements of it to be able to then cope with further growth. So I guess the lesson from those is, and I get the tension, you have very limited resources and you've got to get customers signed up, but I've seen it quite a few times where organizations won't pay attention to tech debt and they allow it to build up, and then it becomes an absolute choke on the growth of the business. And so putting aside time in each sprint or whatever, a bit of time for tech debt eradication and staying on top of it is just a little bit of cost every sprint is absolutely the way to go. If you build it up and you're successful, it'll be a major problem in the future.
So a couple questions on that, Symon. If say a startup is prioritizing a chunk of their time with their dev team to kind of look at that tech eradication, how would you approach, what would you focus on? Because I suppose there's some technical debt that's kind of like annoying, but it's not going to be the end of the world. There's other technical debt that becomes exponentially painful if other things are being built on top of it, and then that collapses, and then you have to refactor everything. Like, how would you encourage folks listening to kind of their thinking on how they prioritize? Because just like their startup on the other side of things, they can't get through everything. And
Yeah.
it'll be the same for this side of it, right? So they can't do everything. So what would you steer them towards?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it's a bit of a how long's a piece of string question, because everyone's platform's different.
Yeah.
It's actually a bigger question. So another example, that we've seen a few times, again, in one really big customer, is where, and this is almost a culture issue, where every business goes through this, so it's not unique to SaaS, but you have the people at the early stage of your business that just strive in chaos, don't get overwhelmed by anything being too hard, can make shit happen, they just sort of get stuff done with the resources that they've got. But then you get to this point in time where, hey, actually we're a medium or larger size company now, and we need to stop behaving like a scrappy startup with no resources, because the impact of something going wrong is just too big. And that actual it's almost like the CEO or the exec leadership team need to know when to do an intervention on themselves, in terms of, okay, we're not the number 8 wire approach no longer works. It's too risky for us to keep doing that. We actually need to invest in making sure that what we're building is robust, and we're not tying ourselves into tech debt issues going forward. So it's really hard to identify that, I think, Casey, and perhaps it's good to get a periodic sort of external review almost, on for someone to come in and just make sure that, and there are some companies that do that. I think Hyper is one of them, HYPR. They did a lot of that through, I think, NZTE. So it can get funded. I'm not sure if they're still doing it that way, but they do like a review on your engineering approaches, and are you accumulating tech debt and so on, and help you to comprehend that. But a really good example is a customer with a database structure which was fine for X thousand users or thousands of users, and now is no longer. So I think certainly I guess listening to the challenges that are coming up from your development team as you are scaling out, and not becoming desensitized to them. Oh yeah, you keep telling me that, but it keeps working, so let's just keep going. I don't have the silver bullet answer to that, other than being mindful of the fact that if you're growing quickly, you should be looking back and making sure that you're not digging yourself into a hole that you're not going to be able to get out of easily.
Gotcha. If I play that back to you, Simon, then while there's not necessarily like a magic bullet on do this, the first step is to be proactively listening to the nuances of your project, and there are elements of how you do that. So obviously, as you like, it's funny you mentioned that whole like, oh yeah, I've heard that one before, because it's every week. There's always like something that's like going slow or breaking, or like, so it's just part of the weekly grind, right? But if it's like a recurring pattern of a particular area, and then I'll be really interested to know, have you got any methodologies or how you think about, it might be problematic but doable now, but if you scale by an order of magnitude or whatever, it can go exponential, and then the challenges, everything starts kind of falling apart. Are there ways that you can approach that side of things, or?
Yes, well, I guess you could. I guess load testing is a pretty if it's that sort of input that would cause the problem. Load testing for projected loads, or even understanding what your what are the growth aspirations of the business, what trajectory you're on. SaaS companies typically grow pretty quickly, so feeding that back into the development team to let them know what's coming. And it's certainly, if there's a platform team as well, to say, look, we might be at 50,000 daily active users now, we're going to be at 500,000 in 10 months time. Are we going to cope and have that as
that's great.
As some sort of regular feedback loop.
So load testing, and then applying those other two things which you mentioned, which would be like looking for your ranges of where things are normal, because if it's significantly out of that, and then you do load testing as well, like the differentiator might like scale exponentially as well, go up significantly, and then the underutilized resources. So those seem super technical.
Yeah, I think there's one more to add to that. Well, there's lots of things to add to it, but one that's top of mind, which I've seen used to quite great success actually, is tools like New Relic, and I'm just thinking of New Relic in particular, where a while ago they enabled you to hit the API when you did a release, and then it would sort of set some counters relevant to the release, so you could compare sort of key transaction times between releases. And so those APM, those application performance management tools are pretty essential really for understanding the key user experience metrics of users using your app. And if you can see those, if you monitor those pretty closely and you can see that over time key metrics are declining, well, that's a leading indicator to issues that you may have in the future. Absolutely, if you're not fabulous at using application performance management tools, become fabulous at using them, because they are pretty much the voice of the user in terms of people using your app. And so you can put telemetry into your app to record those key transactions. What is the really, I'm submitting the role for a school. Okay, I want it to be submitted within 3 seconds of pressing submit. Okay, well, we're getting to 2.7, now we're 2.8, now we're 2.9 seconds. Obviously it's going to fluctuate a bit, but you can see the average. Okay, something's going on. What is it? Are we just, what part of the system is getting overloaded or slowing down?
Gotcha.
Being really proactive about it is quite important.
That's cool. It almost feels a little bit akin to like on the digital marketing frontier, like one of the first and most fundamental steps for a good digital marketing strategy is having all the tracking in place.
Yeah.
Because that data in is how you improve things, right? And it helps you identify where you should be putting your efforts. We've got a number of questions coming through. So I wonder if we start hitting them. We've got one from Gary. Thank you for the question, Gary, which is, hi, Simon. Can you please explain what a reserved instance is?
Hi, Gary. Yeah, absolutely. So a reserved instance is basically you committing to one of the public cloud providers to consume a volume of a resource over a period of time, and when you do that, you get a discount. So as an example, you might commit to an EC2 instance or a like a web app in Azure terms for 12 months. So as in the Microsoft example, there's like 20 or so different things that you can reserve an instance for, and you can commit to either 12 months, 1 year or 3 years, and the 1 year discounts, in fact, don't quote me on it, but it's significant. It's like 30% or something, and 3 years is even more. So yeah, well worth looking into. Yeah, and that term should be applicable to both sort of Azure and AWS. But yeah, basically you commit, and in the Microsoft world at the moment, you can get out of them without too much penalty. So they're certainly worth looking into. I just saw something flash up about NZ startups. I didn't quite get the question, but what I have awfully omitted to say is that I gave the New Relic example, but there's a really great tool called Raygun. I think it's raygun.io maybe. Kiwi company based out of Wellington, same sort of thing. Yeah, JD's business, that's it. So yeah, that's an example of one of those tools that can help you understand the, there you go, thank you, help you understand the end user experience. And if you're not using those tools, you are literally driving with the lights off at night.
Cool, well worth checking out. I've got another question, which is from Cormac. What could you do on a weekly basis, such as a sprint, not a big project, ways to temperature check what's going on? I know we've kind of touched on this, but would there be anything you'd add?
Temperature check what's going on, is that what, from a performance perspective or from a tech debt accumulation perspective? If it's, yeah, I mean, a
sprint, not a big project.
Yeah. well, from a performance perspective, that's not really a sprint by sprint thing. That's an ongoing, all the time thing. Yeah, so I'm not quite sure. Maybe if we just get a bit more clarity around that question.
Maybe, yeah, Cormac, if you bolster the question a bit, we'll answer it in more depth. Maybe if I take a first stab at the direction of it. You mentioned a bit earlier, Symon, on factoring a couple hours each week for your dev team to focus on making sure tech debt doesn't get out of hand and performance side of things like that. Are there things within, if you did cut out a couple hours, are there things that you'd kind of prioritize? Obviously, first step would be turning the lights on. So getting like this measurement side of things. Is there anything else?
Yeah, there's an example of a customer who was building on Azure, and in fact, many customers actually have a outdated version of the Azure SDK that they're leveraging. And there was a problem that they were facing. I'm trying to remember the specifics. I think it was to do with performance management and being able to get more insights out of one of the objects that they were consuming. And because they had the old version of the SDK, they couldn't deploy a new feature because it didn't work with the old version of the SDK. And the new feature had the telemetry, capability within it to be able to understand what was going on. So here's a great example of, letting the SDK get out of date, and it gets so out of date that it's a major to catch up, as opposed to small iterative change if you stay on top of it. And then that actually had a customer impacting consequence, because they couldn't understand what was going on in the stack well enough, because they were using the outdated SDK. So that's a very tactical example, but it's that's the sort of thing that happens.
So folks, for SDKs, that's software development kit. So it's like installing different packages to allow you to do what you're doing, because a big part of code is not reinventing the wheel, right? So if someone's already built something great, kind of pull that in. But the older versions, sometimes you're rolling with them and it works, but then exactly to your point, Symon, make sure it's up to date. So I guess being able to go through it, do a health check on all your packages. A lot of them are automated, where you can kind of just update all your SDKs, but I suppose there's probably edge cases where that doesn't get caught, and then you do have outdated SDKs.
Yeah, and it can seem like, oh, that's just too much work, we can't afford it, we've got to build this feature. And that sort of leads me on to, I've had a couple of customers who have had like a really big customer, and in some cases a minor shareholder. And that big customer is the tail wagging the dog, smashing the dog into the floor and the walls, saying, build me this feature now. And, that can really consume, that can be one of the reasons, I guess, where you might say, I've got to keep this customer happy. I haven't got time to do that tech debt stuff. I've also got to keep up with the product roadmap requirements and so on. So yeah, I know that's a really hard one to work around, right? Especially when you're early stage and they are, a big customers, giving you paid feature requests, which, are oxygen. So you sort of need to take them, but letting them define your product roadmap and your capacity of your dev team is pretty dangerous. Unless you're pretty confident that what they want you to build is what the rest of your market wants as well. It's a
hard thing
scenario.
Because in a way, it's almost the direction that you did at the start with Mark, right?
Yeah.
Of having a customer where you're kind of building out based on what their needs are. So it can work, but you also have to balance that with the foresight of where you're wanting to go with things as well.
Absolutely, and I think I pretty much fluked it with him. Like he totally was telling me what to do all the time, and I was like, okay, it seems pretty. That seems like other organizations probably need that too. Sure, there was a lot of bespoke stuff for them, but the way we built the bespoke stuff was sort of to build a framework which allowed us to build bespoke stuff for anyone and do it fairly easily. And that's why I went off to SaaS to validate. Am I just one company's answer, or am I actually doing this? And lots of them want it. So that market validation piece was really important, and more fluke than design that I did that. I just getting really passionate about the sector, and really wanted to immerse myself in it to comprehend what we were doing had legs, and man, I'm glad we did. I mean, going from, not to poo-poo my enterprise customers, which we love, of course, that we still do a bit of VMware work for them, but the corporate enterprise market, technology still for most of them is a cost and expense that needs to be controlled and minimized, and don't change anything. Whereas the SaaS sector is so fabulous to work with, because technology is your storefront pretty much, or it powers it. And having a technology discussion, having a strategic discussion with a SaaS company, when we talk about the things that technology can do and so on, it is, it changes the business. So it's just a fabulous industry to be in, which is pretty much why I've immersed myself in it for 7 years.
Yeah, it's a good place to be.
Sorry. Yeah, but off track.
No, that's all good. This is where the gems come out. We've got another question, which is from Max, which is, I wonder if there is a formula to calculate how to invest in quality resilience of the solution. I suspect I am over-investing.
Oh, good question. Really good question. And what we're actually doing, Max, is we're just pulling it together now, and I'll have it ready for Southern SaaS in August, as I'm building out a whole bunch of metrics like that across our customers. And we'll put the survey out publicly. But I want to understand metrics like that. Like, what do my peers spend on resilience compared to what I'm spending on it? Well, are you under investing or over investing? The beauty of being on public clouds, which I really hope everyone listening is that the whole business continuity and high availability solutions are out of the box pretty cheap, really. Yes, it's additional cost, and I worked in business continuity for 8 years before getting into this, and I know that everyone needs it and no one wants to pay for it. Sort of like security as well, but you have to have it. And so, and with public cloud, you can do it pretty cost effectively, and even in many cases you can leverage your replicas and so on for read only stuff and other things, so you can still get some value out of them. But great question, and I don't have the answer off the top of my head, but we're about to survey our customers in the wider public to get those ratios, which, for people who respond to the survey, we'll share those metrics so you can understand, how you benchmark yourself against your peers to understand, am I spending the right amount on it? Because it's a fabulous question.
So I guess an actionable thing you could do, Max, is go on over and follow Parallo, and as well as Symon on LinkedIn and whatnot. And then I'm sure once you have that ready to push to the public, Symon, you'll put it through those mediums.
You bet. Yeah, and that'll be in the next few weeks probably. That survey will go out.
Cool. Next question from Tristan Pollack. Kia ora, Tristan. Tristan's been on a few webinars in the past and a long-term supporter of Kiwi Landing Pad. The question is, how do you balance the complexity and quantity of cloud tools these days?
Well, that's a good question. Well, speaking personally, we've always been pretty focused and try to do the same thing many times over. So what's happening, certainly, I mean, we're sort of weighted towards the Microsoft ecosystem, but I'm trying not for this not to be a Microsoft discussion. There are some pretty comprehensive capabilities, certainly in Azure, that cover off most of your fundamental tooling needs, for backend stuff. They're in GitHub now. There's Azure DevOps, there's application insights, there's log analytics, there's Sentinel for security. There's a whole bunch of different things, and I'm sure in the AWS ecosystem that's similar, perhaps more third-party tools. But in terms of balancing them, I guess it's that's a very good question. But I guess it comes back to what is the problem you wanted to solve, and can you rationalize tools down to solve all of those problems that you're looking to solve. There's certainly one of the fabulous things about SaaS these days, of course, is that interoperability is a primary objective, and I'm assuming probably most people are aware of this. Certainly as a consumer, if I'm looking for a SaaS app for my business, I want to know what else it natively integrates with. And if it doesn't natively integrate, well, is there a Zapier, interconnect between the two and so on? So it's it's not that difficult to have these things sort of joined together to have a fairly cohesive view of it. But some interesting stats from a company called Tech Research Asia. Your average SMB business has somewhere between 25 and 50 SaaS apps. So, you know, there is a bit of creep, of course, but yeah, that's a hard question to answer with a silver bullet answer. But,
yeah, it kind of ties on the same question that Shane Gibson had, which is a great question, ties in the same thing. I'll read it out just so everyone has context of any set proven path tools that you'd recommend for startups, such as for monitoring, testing, log management, etc. And I guess it goes back to that point that you're making, Symon, which is that there's no silver bullet, it's how long's a piece of string, but there's the same starting point, and the same starting point is visibility. So that's where you start by turning the lights on and getting something like Raygun or whatever the different tools are. So that way you at least know what the hell is happening. And then from there, you could figure out, actually, this feels disproportionately bad. What are the tools available for that thing? And then you can, so you start triaging at base, but until you have that visibility, you're going in the dark anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that is a good question, which thank you for that question. I will put that into our survey.
Yeah,
so
actually, that'd be awesome. That would be like, I wonder if that would be really cool if there's a way to kind of almost collate, like, what are the common tools that you guys lean on and encourage folks to use? Because if there's a list of them, then that's something we could circulate to the community as well. That would be quite practical.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Sweet. Well, we're looking at coming to the end of the session. We've hit all the questions. If there are any more, do let them come through. We've got one that's just come through now. I know we've done that one. Just looking at the list of the stuff we've prepared, Symon. We've hit a lot of it. What trends do you see continuing to happen in this space?
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you haven't already looked at it, if you want to feel good about what you're doing, look up the Bessemer Venture Partners State of the Cloud report. So State of the Cloud 2021. They do it every year. They normally talk about it at SaaStr as well. It will blow your mind if you haven't already seen it in terms of what's happening in the SaaS sector. So the market cap of public SaaS companies in 2019 went from February 2019 was 690 billion. February 2020 was 1 trillion. November 2020 was 2 trillion, and February 2021 was 2.2. So it went from 690 to 1 to 2.2. It went from 1 to 2 trillion in 9 months. You know, this is bananas. This is it's just incredible. And then Bessemer has a sort of Cloud 100. I think they actually helped pull together a bunch of companies that have become a ETF, you know, an exchange traded fund that you can invest in. For public companies, but the multiples, the multiples that those companies were getting acquired at in 2018 was 11 times as revenue multiples for valuation. In 2019 was 13 times, in 2020, 23 times. You know, it's gone from 13 times to 23 times in terms of revenue multiples. So you cloud guys have got it so easy when it comes to valuations. Us services guys have to actually make money because we get multiples of profit. But yeah, that's happening, right? The massive market cap jump obviously helped by the multiple jump. But there is tons of money out there looking for a home. In 2010, 14 billion was invested in private SaaS companies. In 2020, 186 billion was invested in private SaaS companies. That's a 1,200% increase. Excuse me. So, one of the Bessemer conclusions was there is way more capital than there are SaaS assets to invest in. So, you know, fabulous time to be in your sector. And I think in terms of how do you capitalize on that? So in terms of trends, you know, that's absolutely what we're seeing. There are, interestingly, so we've got about 45 SaaS companies we manage. There's over 50 that we engage with. I actually had a look at what verticals are in, 36 different verticals. So, you know, there is absolutely these subject matter experts identifying a problem in a vertical and starting a business up. excuse me, what we see across our customers is of those, I think there's only 2 that don't actually have their own in-house development team. Those 2 are non-technical founders, specialists in their field that decided to solve a problem, and so offshored or went out and outsourced the dev of the platform. Both of them are wanting to bring it in-house. So absolutely, and we don't build apps for customers because we understand that that's pretty much your IP, and having it close to you is most efficient. We've got customers who have, this is probably a contentious topic, but we've got customers who have large offshore teams, and they might have the dev manager or the VP engineering in NZ or in Aussie, and then a big Philippines or Ukraine or whatever Indian dev team. And in a few cases, the general feeling has been that it's actually not really worth it, even though you pay cents on the dollar for the resource, unless you have really highly competent local management where those developers are. It's pretty difficult to get a good result, and so that's fact from a couple of customers of mine. That offset, of course, by ways of working and how COVID has impacted us, and now working from home is pretty normal. But all that sort of feeds into this major issue, I think, in terms of trends, which is there is no one to recruit. If we continue to rob people off each other, we're just paying musical chairs and we're all slowing ourselves down. I think there is an obligation on us to create sort of rapid people development pathways to grow resource, and obviously we need to import it as well. But that's a trend that I'm starting to see. Certainly we're doing that, growing a development pathway for our people to take grads and rapidly make them useful. And I know some organizations have been doing this for a while, but if you look at who's out there recruiting, Plexure have, I don't know, 70 or 80 roles. Serco have about the same. Halter have 70 or so roles they're recruiting for. There's a lot of capital coming in, meaning I've got money to hire people, and it's just a black hole for people getting sucked in. So that's a real major. But I guess the key takeaway point, I know we're almost at the end, Casey, is really just focusing on the right things, because there are so many things that you can do and need to, but coming back to, you've got to show consistent growth to get the next funding round. Don't focus on things you don't need to. Set yourself some OKRs, make sure you live by them, make sure you've got some great leading indicators in place to understand if you're doing the right things, and absolutely get the right people. So a really interesting anecdote is that everyone would be familiar with PushPay. So in my opinion of working with lots of SaaS companies, PushPay is a university for exceptionally great engineering people. I've seen them across a bunch of our customers. In fact, we've employed one as well, and they're fabulous. So, getting the right people, it's that age-old thing. It's not SaaS specific, but that is absolutely essential. So focusing on the right things, making sure you've got the right leading indicators in place, and having the right people would be my hopefully key takeaways that you take away from this. But very happy to engage with anyone directly if you'd like to discuss more or anything else. I'll talk forever on this stuff.
Well, this has been honestly a phenomenal session. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, Symon. So thank you so much for taking the time to jump on and share your deep insights. I've just put your LinkedIn in the chat as well, so folks do connect with Symon. Super knowledgeable in the space, and it's been great. So with that said, thank you everyone for tuning in and for all your fabulous questions. Again, Symon, thank you for jumping on and doing such a deep dive on this topic, and look forward to talking in the near future.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks, Casey, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Kia ora. Bye.
Yeah.